So, what would actually happen if the US and Israel decided to launch a coordinated strike to take out Iran's top leadership? Well, our source material paints a pretty dramatic and frankly unsettling picture, and that's exactly what we're going to break down right now.
The whole scenario kicks off with an absolute bombshell announcement, one that would send shockwaves across the entire globe. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, is dead, taken out in a targeted missile attack.
So the first question on everyone's mind is, how could a strike of this magnitude even happen? How do you take out one of the most powerful figures in the Middle East? Well, we're going to look at the military campaign that made it possible, the immediate political fallout, and maybe most importantly, the really tough questions this raises for the whole region.
And it all started with a mission name that honestly sounds like it's straight out of a blockbuster movie.
So the Pentagon's name for their side of things was Operation Epic Fury. Meanwhile, Israel called its part Lion's Roar. But look, these aren't just cool-sounding code names. They represent a massive, multi-pronged attack using a pretty devastating mix of advanced weapons. And I think the real takeaway here is just the incredible level of coordination something like this would require.
Okay, so the whole attack was designed for one thing: maximum surprise. And when you look at the timeline, you can see just how fast everything unfolds. The strikes kick off at 2:45 a.m. Eastern, which is 9:45 a.m. in Iran, right in the middle of their workday. Then, just an hour later, the Ayatollah's compound is hit. Iran retaliates, and they do it fast. But by the evening, it's over. Their own state media has to get on the air and confirm the news to the world.
And of course, the human cost was immediate and just devastating. Along with the Ayatollah and other key military leaders, the source reports that over 200 Iranians were killed on that first day alone. And just tragically, that number included 18 students at an elementary school. Iran's retaliation against Israel also had a cost. One woman was killed in Tel Aviv, and more than 100 people were injured.
Now, as you can probably imagine, a military strike of this size isn't just going to happen in a vacuum. It immediately set off a political firestorm, not just in Washington, but all around the globe. The U.S. administration's justification was pretty direct. According to the source, President Trump framed the killing in very stark moral terms, calling the Ayatollah one of the most evil people in history.
But that was far from the only reaction here at home. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries immediately raised a constitutional red flag. His argument? The president never got congressional authorization, and that decision, he said, recklessly put American troops in harm's way. And then you have Senator Bernie Sanders, who took it even a step further, drawing this really painful, direct line to past conflicts. He didn't mince words, calling the attack illegal and unconstitutional and saying, the American people were lied to about Vietnam, Iraq, and are being lied to again today. This condemnation quickly went global too. The United Nations Security Council called an emergency session, and the Secretary General issued this very grave warning about a potential chain of events that no one can control. Basically, he was saying this could spin out of control really, really fast.
So all of this begs a really important question. Why is the aftermath so incredibly unpredictable? Well, to get that, we have to look inside Iran, because it's a much more complex place than many people realize, with all these fault lines running right through its society.
It's easy to think of Iran as this one monolithic place, but it's really not. While the majority, about 61%, are ethnically Persian, you've got these really significant minorities, like the Azeris and the Kurds. And interestingly, the source points out that only about 2% of the population is ethnically Arab.
And you see a pretty similar picture when you look at the religious landscape. Iran is overwhelmingly Shia Muslim, no doubt, but there's a Sunni minority, about 5 to 10%, that's concentrated in some really key strategic parts of the country. Okay, so why does this matter? Well, these ethnic and religious divisions create these deep-seated, long-standing tensions. You have groups like the Kurds in the west and the Baluchis in the southeast who've had grievances with the government for years. And this, right here, is the critical point our source makes. An outside intervention risks taking these fault lines and cracking them wide open, potentially sparking a civil war, kind of like what we saw happen in Iraq.
And this really gets to the core argument of the entire analysis. Just toppling a leader isn't a real strategy. It completely ignores the fact that every nation is basically a fragile coalition of competing interests. And if you suddenly remove the one thing holding it all together, well, those competing interests can tear a country apart.
Which brings us to the biggest question of all, the one at the very heart of an operation like this. What is the end game?
On one hand, the stated goal was regime change, right? The idea was that Iranian civilians would just take over.
But the analysis in our source material is pretty skeptical of that. Without an occupying force to manage the transition, you could easily get a power vacuum in a civil war. So the more likely outcome? It's not some new democracy, but probably just more of the same. A new leadership with a similar structure, desperately trying to put the pieces back together.
And even what might seem like a simple solution, like, say, bringing back the monarchy, that's probably not going to work either. One expert in the source puts it perfectly, saying that all this talk is really more about rejecting the rule of the clergy than calling for the restoration of the monarchy. It just goes to show you how incredibly complex this whole situation is. And so, this whole scenario leaves us with the one single most critical question. It's a question that echoes through the history of so many foreign interventions. After the bombs fall and the leadership is gone, what's the plan for the day after?